And welcome back now to page two. We are back with two Time magazine contributor, Graham Allison and Peter Bergen, who are responsible for Time's cover story this week about the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and they have some new details. Mr. Bergen also has a brand new book coming out Tuesday called Manhunt, the 10-year search for bin Laden from 9/11 to Abbottabad. David Ignatius of the Washington Post joins us this morning from Santa Barbara, and our own CBS News correspondent John Miller is with us, who usually on weekdays is with CBS This Morning, but he's up early on a Sunday for a change. John actually was the last person, the last American, I believe, to interview bin Laden in 1998, back when he was with ABC. Graham Allison, I want to start with you because, you know, we're hearing the administration and everybody is talking about how they got Osama bin Laden, and they certainly did. But it turns out that there were some of the president's most senior advisors who didn't want to do this. And tell us how you found out that, and tell us the details.
Well, it's an amazing story, and it's one twist and turn is more amazing than the next. At the last meeting, when President Obama went around the room, the Vice President, Biden, said, don't do it. So if Biden had been president, Osama bin Laden would be alive today. Gates, the most experienced member of the national security decision-making, somebody who had seen Carter make decisions, Bush 41, Reagan, Bush 43, his Secretary of Defense, he would not have chosen the option. Even his chief, the military person who was most directly involved, Huss Cartwright, who was the vice chairman of the JCS, would have chosen a different option. So, as Gates said, he's seen a lot of presidents make difficult decisions. This was one of the toughest calls he's seen.
I never asked a reporter to reveal their sources, but how did you find this out?
Well, most of these people are folks I know professionally for a long career and have talked to, so I've been doing a case study of this, like my old case study of the Cuban Missile Crisis, basically fascinated by the national security decision process and the very hard calls that this required. There's a temptation to think of this as a no-brainer. You get Osama bin Laden in your crosshairs, of course you go. But hunters know the most important question when you're thinking about a target is when to pull the trigger. If you shoot too soon, the turkey may get away. Yeah. If you wait too long, he may hear you and he may escape. So this was a case where for 5 months after there was a plausible, actually after CIA thought they had this guy in their crosshairs, the process deliberated to get to the point where the president thought he had a high confidence that this was the right target in his crosshairs, and he took careful aim before firing.
You make the point in your piece in Time that this was one time when the government worked. It actually worked. Peter Bergen, I want to ask you, your book comes out Tuesday. You've been looking at this. Graham concentrated mostly on the decision-making toward the end. You've been looking at this for a long time. What did you find out that you find most significant?
Well, just going to the question of the president's decision for a minute. Michael Morrell, the deputy director of the CIA, in around December before the May raid, told the president that the circumstantial case that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction was better than the circumstantial case that bin Laden was in Abbottabad. That's a pretty amazing comment. Really? And President Obama asked Morrell and others, why is it that so many people have different percentages about the possibility that bin Laden is there? And Morrell says something along the lines that a lot of this is about your experience. So the people hunting bin Laden have a higher degree, the people who spent years doing this have a highest degree of certitude. The people who were involved in the WMD problem in Iraq tend to have a lower degree of certitude. But as Graham said, when your two most senior advisors and your second most senior military advisor are both sort of advising you to do something pretty different, it is an amazing decision that he made. I also reported on the ground in Abbottabad and was able to get inside bin Laden's
You also interviewed Osama bin Laden at one time, did you not?
Yeah, two out of three of us here have done that. Yeah, it was interesting to go inside the room where bin Laden was killed. I kind of expected it would be like going inside Hitler's bunker. It didn't really feel like that. It was more like visiting a squalid suburban compound. He had a tiny little toilet, which he had to squat over, a tiny little kitchen. He was not living large. He was surrounded by his kids. It was a kind of comfortable but confining retirement. He obviously spent nearly 6 years there. You know, he was surrounded by, you know, a lot of his wives and his kids. It was, he was trying to retain control of his organization. I was given access to some of the declassified documents that explain what he was trying to do, and some of it was delusional, but some of it was still, he was still trying to stay in charge of what remained the rest of his organization.
Let's go out to Santa Barbara. David Ignatius, you also got a look at some documents that were not widely distributed. People are feeling pretty good about that, but how do you feel about it? Has the death of Osama bin Laden really changed things very much?
Well, I have two things, Bob. One is that Al-Qaeda burned itself out. It was an organization that even bin Laden himself, before he was killed, understand it failed in its aims of violent jihad. If you read these documents, you find a bin Laden who's deeply upset by mistakes that his affiliates have made in killing too many Muslims, to the point that in one document he ruminates about rebranding the organization, dropping the name Al-Qaeda altogether. So he knew before he died the extent of that military failure. In terms of ideas, as I travel the Arab world and read about what's happened there in this amazing year of uprising and awakening, I'm struck by how many of the people who've risen owe their Muslim ideology to people who bin Laden himself looked to. There are some of the same roots. So you see Muslim Brotherhood leaders or Salafist leaders rising into prominent positions in Egypt, possibly in Syria, if Bashar al-Assad is overthrown, certainly in the future in Libya. So bin Laden's violent dreams of jihad probably died with him, but the idea of purifying the Muslim world of Western influence, of getting what he called apostate leaders like Hosni Mubarak in Egypt out of their jobs, that's actually happened.
John Miller, you were, I guess, the last American to interview Osama bin Laden. Let me just ask you about one thing. Newsweek magazine is reporting this morning that the U.S. government was laying the groundwork to issue sealed indictments against members of the Pakistani government or anyone else they believed had helped bin Laden, but that no smoking gun was found and the indictments were never returned. Have you found since then, and I know you were in the government at the point this was happening, is there any evidence that Pakistanis were involved?
Well, I think that the theory of, preparing indictments or laying the groundwork to prepare indictments is a bit of a stretch. I mean, when you have something that maybe less than 100 people in the entire U.S. government had any inkling of, and the people who had any actual understanding of it was, kind of in the below 20 number, the idea that they would be presenting evidence to a grand jury of 23 people about this, the whole process would have been pretty much a waste of paper. But to get to your question, which is, did they know? After the fact, we had very little indication that anybody in the Pakistani government was any less surprised about Osama bin Laden being in Abbottabad than anybody else who heard the story. They seemed to be genuinely shocked. A lot of work was done after that to kind of figure out, from an intelligence perspective, who knew what and when, and there's no indication that at a high level any deal was made or that there was any awareness that I saw.
Bob, I think this is the most amazing. I mean, this whole thing, every twist and turn, is sort of more amazing than the last one. But I would say the most amazing thing about this is that there's only two possibilities. Either Kayani and Pasha, the head of ISI, the leadership of the Pakistani military, knew that a guy had been living in their country for 8 years, had been in a house for 6 years, had 5 wives, had children in the hospital. So everybody has imagined, of course they had to know. Or the other hypothesis is they didn't know. Now, which of these is more frightening? In the first case, at least you know who you're dealing with. They're complicit. That would be the normal expectation. I can't think of anybody who's actually integrated in their head a picture of Pakistani leadership in which they could not know. It just seems inconceivable. But on the other hand, all of the evidence seized in the raid, which was a huge amount of evidence, and all the rest of the intelligence has been combed through carefully, looking for leads for guys to go get after. So there's been a lot of cleanup after this. No evidence whatever of people complicit. So then you at least have to entertain this second hypothesis
what do you think?
that they didn't know.
There's
And if they didn't know, it's even more frightening.
Interesting middle ground, though, which is there's been some suggestion that they had some awareness that there might be a wife or wives there, that there's part of a tacit deal that we'll just keep that on the side. Never imagining, by the way, that Osama bin Laden himself would be there, because why would he be in such a high-risk place as Abbottabad? That the deal was tacitly, if we don't mention that, then, you know, Al-Qaeda in the main doesn't attack Pakistan.
Peter, what do you think?
There's no evidence that anybody in the Pakistani government knew. Bin Laden was a very paranoid and disciplined person. There were people living in that compound who didn't know Bin Laden was living there. Some of the wives of the couriers. So, by the way, it took 10 years and $500 billion for the United States to find Bin Laden, not for a lack of trying. They weren't aware that he was living in Abbottabad till, you know, August of 2010. So, and also, by the way, Bin Laden had tried to kill President Musharraf on 2 occasions in December of 2003. So there was no love lost between the Pakistani state and Bin Laden.
There is another nugget in your story, Graham, that was really fascinating, and that is, how did they keep this raid a secret for so long?
Well, Tom Donilon's good one-liner is, the only way to keep a secret in Washington is don't tell anybody. And I think the fact, I would say...
I mean, they really held this very close,
until
didn't they?
24 hours before the operation, the majority of the members of the National Security Council were in the dark. So this was held extremely tightly. 6 people in the White House right through till almost the end. And I think that it reminds us that sometimes secrets matter. If this had leaked and had appeared in a blog or appeared in the press, Osama bin Laden would have vanished. I mean, if I had been involved as an advisor in the process, I would have said, we got to shoot sooner. You can't wait over this long period of time to be sure you got the right guy in the crosshairs and to make sure you aim and practice before you fire. But they did, and I think it suggests something about a cool discipline that was a little surprising.
I just want to go around, and I'll start with David on this one. David, are we safer today because Osama bin Laden is dead?
Yes. I think without question, as near as I can tell from the documents I've looked at, till the day he died, he was looking for ways to kill Americans, looking for ways to get Al-Qaeda operatives into the United States. He was instructing people to train in aviation, meaning that he looked for a reprise of the September 11 attacks. He specifically, this may have been fantasy, as Peter suggested earlier, but he specifically wanted to target our president, Barack Obama. He also wanted to kill General Petraeus. So in terms of killing Americans, he wanted to do it. The fact that he's gone and that his core Al-Qaeda leadership is so badly battered, I think does make us safer. The person who's now in charge seems much more comfortable than bin Laden was in these peripheral fights in Muslim countries where a lot of Muslims get killed. That's what bin Laden
and that is Zawahiri
didn't like.
Who is running things?
That's Dr. Ayman
Zawahiri.
Zawahiri. He's an Egyptian doctor, and he's been with the movement for a long time. He has tried to insert himself in the struggle. He's had a video message in February, Onward Lions of Syria, to the Syrian opposition. There's not a lot of evidence that the Syrian opposition sees him as its leader, although there are some Al-Qaeda members who were involved in operations against Bashar al-Assad. But on your basic question, the President made a tough decision. He's going to argue, and he's right, that Americans are safer because of it.
Peter, what's your thought?
Yeah, 17 Americans have been killed in the United States by Al-Qaeda or people influenced by its ideas since 9/11. More Americans die in their bathtubs by significant amounts, accidentally drowning. We don't have an irrational fear of accidental bathtub drownings. About 300 Americans die every year in that manner. The death of bin Laden, this process, I think was happening long before the death of bin Laden, before the Arab Spring. They were losing the war of ideas in the Muslim world. They were killing a lot of Muslim civilians. David has indicated that even bin Laden understood that that was a problem for them. So, we're relatively much safer.
Quickly,
so yes, this took off the head of the snake, but I think the big news is that we live now in an era in which other people can do this. So while Al-Qaeda is at the point of strategic defeat, the idea that the U.S. is not vulnerable to major attacks in the future is unfortunately wrong, and we will be as long as we can see.
John, I'll let you be cleanup.
I think, you know, that Al-Qaeda figured out something important, which was the messenger is actually more important than the message. You had Ammar al-Awlaki putting his videos out on YouTube, the democratization of television. So frankly, now we've got the tail wagging the dog, which is they're reaching the masses, and we are seeing through the homegrown extremists, it might not be Al-Qaeda's front office, but the message is getting out, and we do see those plots every year against the U.S. Soil.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I learned a lot here.